All right, welcome to this explainer on what is basically the ultimate academic mountain to climb, the PhD. Now, if you think earning a doctorate is just some standardized cookie-cutter process around the world, well, prepare to be surprised. How you earn a PhD, how you're treated while you're doing it, and honestly, what that degree is ultimately worth depends entirely on where you happen to live.
We've got 5 main stops on our tour today. First up, the origins of the PhD. Second, coursework versus direct research. Third, the big question of students versus salaried employees. Fourth, defending the dissertation. And finally, the post-PhD reality. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. Origins of the PhD, tracing the academic lineage. You know, the actual term Doctor of Philosophy comes from the Latin words philo, meaning lover, and sophia, meaning wisdom, so literally a lover of wisdom. But historically, it wasn't just about loving knowledge for the sake of it. It had a highly functional purpose. It was originally designed purely as a formal authorization for scholars to deliver independent lectures. Basically, it was a medieval teaching license. And as you'll see on this timeline, this whole concept evolved over centuries. Back in the 12th century, in places like Paris and Bologna, university guilds handed out the licentia docendi, a literal license to teach. Fast forward to the Holy Roman Empire, they required the venia legendi, or permission to lecture. Then, by the mid-17th century, Germany starts developing preliminary forms of independent research qualifications. So the degree slowly transitioned from this medieval guild pass into a system that really prioritized verifiable original scholarly output. Section 2. Coursework versus direct research, a philosophical divide. This is where things get really fascinating, because the global divide in how you actually get this degree is absolutely stark. In North America, it operates heavily on an apprenticeship model. If you enter a U.S. program straight out of your undergrad, you are going to spend your first 2 to 3 years just doing intensive coursework and taking rigorous qualifying exams before you even touch your dissertation. It's a 5 to 6 year marathon designed to systematically train future academics. But on the flip side, look at the UK and Australia. They use a model that is incredibly compressed and completely output-oriented. It usually takes just 3 to 4 years, and there is zero coursework. None. Candidates jump straight into their research on day one. Why? Well, in Europe, candidates already have a master's degree, and in Australia, they usually do a specialized research-heavy honors year before enrolling. So the system just assumes you already know how to do research. I absolutely love this quote from a university examiner because it hits the nail right on the head. They said, in the US, a PhD student has to have a good look. In the Australian and British systems, a PhD student has to actually find something. It perfectly captures it. A US dissertation proves you have the systematic capacity to do research, but the Australian and British models, they demand you make a substantial, publishable contribution to knowledge right out of the gate. Section 3. Students or salaried employees, the funding chasm. Now, we have to talk about the money. Are doctoral candidates students or are they employees? Honestly, the answer to this one simple question dictates a massive structural and socioeconomic divide that completely defines a researcher's financial security and legal rights worldwide. Just look at this table. The contrast in daily reality is staggering. In Northern and Western Europe, places like Norway and the Netherlands, you are not a student. You are a professional academic employee. You sign an actual employment contract. We're talking high salary, pension contributions, vacation bonuses, and strong labor union protections. Then compare that to the US, where you are very much a student relying on teaching or research assistantships. You might make $20,000 to $40,000 a year, and you are often scrambling for funding after year 4. Or Australia, where you get a stipend. Sure, the Australian RTP stipend is entirely tax-free, which is great, but it is strictly capped at 3 to 3.5 years. The second you submit that thesis, your payments stop instantly. To really put this into perspective, take a look at this number, 90%. That represents the massive funding rate for STEM PhDs in Germany. These researchers aren't just scraping by, they're largely funded through paid wissenschaftlicher Mitarbeiter research contracts. It's a completely different ballgame. So just to summarize this wild financial chasm, in Scandinavia, you're getting full salaries and up to 12 months of paid parental leave. Germany gives you a solid net monthly income and this incredible 18-month post-graduation visa so you can actually find a job. In the UK and Australia, those tax-free stipends might look okay on paper, but they totally lack the safety nets like pensions or sick pay that European employees get. And in the US, your livelihood is basically tied directly to grading papers or teaching undergraduates. Section 4. Defending the dissertation, the final gateway. So you've done the research, now how do you defend it? Well, the format of this final test varies wildly. In the UK, you face what's called the private viva. It takes place strictly behind closed doors. For 3 to 5 terrifying hours, 2 examiners will subject you to a grueling page-by-page interrogation of your writing. You literally have to actively defend every single methodological choice you made. But take a trip over to continental Europe, Sweden, Germany, and it's a public disputation. Because your thesis has already been totally picked apart during the writing process, this defense is largely ceremonial. It's this huge, highly structured, celebratory public event where you're formally welcomed into the scientific community. Failing at this stage in Europe is almost unheard of. Now, the North American system kind of mashes these two together into the committee defense. Step 1, you do a public presentation summarizing your key findings for your peers. But then, step 2, they kick the public out. You enter a rigorous, closed-door technical questioning phase with your committee that can last up to 2 hours. Finally, step 3, they privately decide your fate. And then, of course, there's Australia. Historically, Australia was a massive global outlier because it had absolutely no oral defense at all. Literally none. You just mailed your thesis off to international experts, they sent back written critiques, and you replied in writing. You never even met them. But that is changing fast. To align with global quality standards, major institutions like the University of Melbourne are now making high-definition video viva voce defenses totally mandatory. Finally, let's talk about Section 5, the post-PhD reality, academia versus industry. Okay, reality check time. For decades, the PhD was viewed almost exclusively as a factory for producing university professors. But look at this chart for U.S. STEM fields today. A whopping 65% of grads are going straight into private industry. Only about 20 to 25% end up securing those coveted, permanent, tenure-track academic positions. The modern PhD is primarily supplying the private sector, and it actively shatters the myth that a doctorate equals an automatic professorship. And hey, this isn't just an American thing. This academic bottleneck is a global phenomenon. The permanent shift into the private sector is massive. 80% of grads in Switzerland, mostly going into finance, tech, and pharma, 75% in Germany, and 70% in the UK. Across all major regions, only a tiny minority of doctoral graduates will ever secure a permanent faculty position. To really drive home how saturated the academic labor market is, get a load of this quote based on recent Australian modeling data. Australia produces enough PhD graduates to completely replace its permanent academic workforce every 3 years. Think about that. The competition is just intense, and the sheer volume of PhDs being completed today massively outpaces the availability of secure academic jobs. Which leaves us with a pretty massive, lingering question. If the degree that was historically designed to create university professors is now primarily supplying the private sector with talent, does the fundamental PhD model need a global redesign for the modern era? It's something the academic world is seriously wrestling with right now. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it gave you a totally fresh perspective on the global academic odyssey.